Hey everyone, and welcome to Rising Light with Bryan and Melissa. What if the exact date, time, and place you were born could offer insight into your personality, your spiritual gifts, and even some of the biggest lessons you're here to learn? I'm Melissa, and I work with my team of angels to help people release old emotional and energetic patterns so they can reconnect with their authentic selves and create a life that is more aligned, peaceful, and true to who they really are. And today we're talking about astrology, what it is, what your birth chart can reveal, and how it can be used as a tool for self awareness and personal growth.
Thanks, Melissa. Yeah, I definitely find this topic interesting on a personal level, maybe more than any other spiritual topic, because it's something that I kind of became obsessed with for over a decade. I mean, I think there was a period where I read almost nothing else other than astrology for a while. And I think my interest really came from trying to better understand why people's personalities were the way they are, and also, to see how we're all exactly as we're meant to be. I think that's the real value of astrology, at least for me, is it really shows people kind of breakdown of different aspects of their personality. In fact, I had a coworker who was pretty skeptical of astrology, and I was telling him about birth charts at work at one point, and I asked him if he would be willing to take a look at his birth chart and then tell me what he thought of it. And I showed it to him, and he actually said that he felt like every parent should get a copy of this when they have a baby, and that because he felt like it was so accurate. And it really changed his mind about astrology because I think most people think of astrology as horoscopes and just their zodiac sign. And I know for me, as a Leo, I never really identified as that sign, especially when I was younger. I feel like maybe as I'm getting into middle age now, I'm starting to feel like the that archetypal energy, the Leo energy, like the creative energy and, the kind of warmth and everything like that. I see that more now, but I have a lot of Libra in my chart. And so I saw those qualities more of a people pleaser when I was younger. So I always thought, Leo, that doesn't make sense to me. Astrology must not be valid. It was only later that I looked at my chart and realized actually emphasis on these other signs like Libra and Sagittarius dominated. And the Leo was the only sign that or the only placement that I had in that sign was my sun sign. So it kind of explained to me why people like me would look at astrology and say, well, this can't be true. It doesn't seem accurate. There's a lot more to it than just zodiac signs, and there's a lot more to it than just the predictive astrology of horoscopes. So I thought it'd be interesting to talk about, the role astrology plays in spiritual growth and how we can develop as individuals and see more into what we're meant to learn in this life. Because a lot of the work you do is about how we grow, psychologically and spiritually. And I feel like astrology can help in that. And I thought it might be worth talking about, where in a person's birth chart they can look to find insight about how they can overcome challenges. It's a really dense topic. I feel like with astrology, it's hard to find a point to really like begin with it because there's so many facets to it. I've been reading about it for a long time. I feel like I've only scratched the surface, but still, I feel like there's some useful points to kind of highlight to show people, maybe where they can see some insight into their chart. And so, if you've never looked up your birth chart before, it's easy enough to do. Just open up a web browser and just type in free birth chart or birth chart calculator, and you'll find no shortage of sites that can help you pull up your birth chart, even if you don't know the exact time you were born, even if you just know the date and location. That'll give you at least a partial chart that you can look at. If you know the time, that will give you some more insight. The time will basically tell you what your ascendant is. And if you've never heard of that term before, it's also called the rising sign. That's essentially the placement that tells you about how you are to people when they meet you for the first time. And beyond that, that's also called your first house, and it has all of the placements for all the other houses. So there's 12 houses. They each kind of correspond to a sign because there's 12 signs in the zodiac. So if you look that up, then you can see all of your different placements, the planets, your sun is your zodiac sign. So most people know that already. As I mentioned, I'm a Leo. And And basically, we'll talk a little bit about, what to look for in a birth chart. And also, I kind of wanted to zoom out a bit too and talk about what, the astrology of the times we're living in tells us about what's happening in the world right now, because it probably appears to a lot of people like we're witnessing the downfall of society. But if you look to the astrology of what's going on right now, we're really going through a cycle of death and rebirth. And so I think that frames what's happening in a different way, that ultimately this isn't a kind of doom and gloom type of scenario, that it's really just it's the snake shedding its skin. It's the dying of the old and the new being reborn. So, but maybe I'll pause there for a second, Melissa, and see if you had any questions. I know normally I'm
Yeah,
asking you the questions, but I kind of want to give you a chance to be the
yeah,
interviewer.
yeah. Thanks. So you said as- about how astrology is reflecting the times that we're in the, I don't know if you use the word ascension, but that's the word I'm going to use. So can you maybe say more specifically what astrology is saying right now about what's going on, the ascension, and what you
Yeah,
call the
and
death and the rebirth?
yep. Yeah, in astrology, there's many different cycles. There's some short cycles, like the I mentioned the ascendant. So the ascendant changes every 2 hours. That's why it's important that you know roughly the time you were born, because if you only know that you were born in the morning, well, that could be a number of different signs. So the ascension or the ascendant takes 2 hours to change signs. And then the sun changes signs about every 30 days. That's why each sign lasts approximately a month. And then if you look at some of the longer cycles, they're what are called the astrological ages, which last approximately 2,200 years. And the age that we've been in for the last 2,200 years approximately is the age of Pisces. And Pisces is the last sign of the zodiac, and it has to do with spirituality and duality. It's two fishes, one vertical, one horizontal. And so it kind of represents focus on the heavens and on the material plane. So again, duality, it's spirituality and um, kind of materialism. I guess you could say materialism, because now we're living in a kind of scientific age where materialism has kind of taken root in our worldview, at least in the West, ever since the Enlightenment. And so the age of Pisces is an age of duality, good and evil, time and space, male and female, and now we're entering into the age of Aquarius slowly. There's some debate as to what date it actually begins, whether it began during the Industrial Revolution or during World War II or the 1960s, or whether it's happening right now, or whether it happens, the next century. But roughly, we're in the transition regardless. So we're feeling the Aquarian energy, and you start to see this even when you look at what's going on right now with this kind of describe it as androgyny, I guess. There's a sort of blurring of the line between the masculine and feminine, or they're kind of merging more within people. And in some ways, that's it could be viewed as a good thing or a bad thing, depending on your point of view. But also, other things are seen as relative, like when I mentioned space and time. The theory of relativity kind of showed like neither of those are absolute. So that was something that occurred in the 20th century. So a brief pause there because there was a slight glitch in Zoom, but you saw in the 20th century that there was, new ways of thinking about reality, that even things we thought to be absolute, like time and space, suddenly started to be seen as relative. Things like good and evil that were previously seen as absolute, especially in religion, are now seen by a lot of people to be relative. That evil is a high degree of unconsciousness, and a person who's good has a high degree of consciousness, that they're really a measurement of one thing, that's just consciousness. And so Aquarius is the reconciler of opposites. It brings what was previously unconscious to the surface so that it can be looked at and ultimately resolved. Because Aquarius is a sign of friendship, it resolves conflict. And the conflict between these things that were seen as absolute opposites is part of what's happening in the Age of Aquarius. Now that's good in a lot of ways. It's challenging in other ways, I'm sure. Aquarius also rules technology because it rules electricity. And it's kind of associated with the unexpected, like a flash of lightning coming out of the sky and brilliance. It's a sign of genius and kind of new ways of thinking, new ways of solving problems. It's a sign of the revolutionary. I think that's why we're not only going into the age of Aquarius, which is a major shift that again happens every 2,200 years, which is part of the greater astrological cycle called the Great Year. When we go through all of the planet or all of the signs rather in this cycle, then you've completed the great year and in astrology, which is a much bigger cycle. So you can kind of see smaller cycles, bigger cycles, massive cycles, and we're going through a massive one right now. And so the reason why I think this is worth mentioning is that whenever you shift from one age to another, when the world shifted from the age of Aries to the age of Pisces. Aries is a sign of war, it's a sign of politics. It was the age of an eye for an eye, which at the time probably seemed like it made a lot of sense, especially compared maybe to what came before, just killing people as punishment for petty crimes. The age of Pisces was an improvement over that. It was the age of forgiveness and compassion because it's a spiritual age. And I see the age of Aquarius as helping to resolve some of the problems of the age of Pisces, which Pisces is the sign of dreams, and it can also be the sign of illusion and deception. So Aquarius is like showing us what was beneath the surface because the sign of Aquarius is the water bearer who brings the contents of the water, which is the symbol for the unconscious, to the surface. So I think when people look at what's happening in the world, I think you and I would both agree. I mean, there's a lot that seems to be happening that feels negative, feels like it's destructive, but these are things that have been around for a long time that I think people just haven't seen until now. We're seeing that a lot with like, files being released and data dumps and things like that. But I think it's helps people see that, in the bigger picture, it's just a transition into a new era where those old systems that no longer serve us in the same way that in the age of Aries, an eye for an eye, suddenly it didn't make sense anymore. It made more sense to maybe have the either forgive people or, maybe a punishment that wasn't as extreme. And now we're kind of entering a new era where, the limitations of the age of Pisces are seen as, like we were unaware of a lot of what was happening beneath the surface, and now we get to see all of that. And it's not always pleasant, but I think we can at least agree that it's good to see things rather than not see them, especially if we're going to make a choice as to where we want to go as a human race, like what kind of planet we want to live on, does require the seeing of things.
Right. Everything needs to come up and be seen so it can move, so we can move into the light, so those things can be eradicated. Because if they stay underground, they stay underground, right? They continue. So hopefully, with all this stuff coming up and the whole world starting to see it, it there will be a shift, which I feel like there is, right? We're already in this shift.
Definitely. I even think people see this reflected in their personal lives too. Because I think what's happening on the, kind of macrocosm is happening in the microcosm, because I think we also see in our own lives things coming to the surface that maybe
Yeah.
are, beliefs that no longer serve us. And
What's not working in our lives, what relationships aren't working.
definitely. And I think that's one of the things that, when I look at astrology, like I've gone through periods in my life where I felt like there was something really challenging happening. And then once I learned about astrology and I could see, like that actually was reflected in transits that were happening, I'm actually in a really good period with my astrology because I'm a Leo and Jupiter, which is the planet of expansion and good fortune. It's the planet everyone loves. Like it's basically the planet that everyone wants to have aspecting their chart, and it brings a kind of ease and competence to things you're doing. It's the area of life where you feel most, kind of skilled and competent at what you're doing. And it brings a kind of expansiveness to life. And when it enters your sign, so which in my case is it happened on June 30th, Jupiter entered Leo. It things just fall into place more easily. You just feel like the universe is supporting you. It'll be in your sign next year because you're a Virgo. And so, I mean, it enters everyone's sign every 12 years. And so I see, when things get easier, but then I can also see areas where, I've felt really challenged in the area of work for the last year or so. And the opposite, in terms of the energy of planets is Saturn, which is the planet of restriction, challenges, and life lessons and karma, and ultimately overcoming challenges was in my area of work for the last year or so. And I felt like not so much that I'm unhappy with the work I'm doing, but just that it's been exhausting. Like I feel like it's just taken a lot more energy. It's been more demanding. So I just find it interesting, like when you look at areas of your life that you might feel you're challenged in or you might feel clumsy, I would suggest people look up their chart and just see what sign they have their Saturn in, because that can a lot of times show you areas where you have like lifelong challenges, or at least especially in the first half of your life, because Saturn shows you areas that you start out challenged, and then in the second half of your life, you actually, if you're aware of the challenges and look at them as like a opportunity for growth, then you actually become a master of them in the second half of your life. And so yeah, I think your Saturn placement is an area where you can look at your chart and see kind of where you might need to focus and sometimes even heal. I think someone who has Saturn in an area that has to do with like their emotions, like if you have Saturn in Cancer, that's considered a difficult placement. And, because Saturn's all about structure and discipline and, kind of it's it's like fatherly energy. It sort of wants to use uh, challenges to help you grow in the way like a father might not go easy on you to help you become a stronger person. Cancer is motherly energy. It's your feelings. It's like, your feeling of being loved. So I feel like Saturn and Cancer might make you feel like you're kind of lacking in nurturing and love in your life. And so a person who might have feelings like that might see that reflected in their chart. So Saturn's a really important planet when you're looking at your birth chart. I'd actually say it's perhaps the most important placement. And we could talk about different placements. I feel like there's a lot of videos that will just break down all of the different placements in a person's birth chart. But if a person wanted to use astrology to help them heal, especially as they're going through these really challenging times, and a lot of that's being brought up in our personal lives, that looking at what Saturn is asking of you, like what are you meant to overcome. I'll share a little bit of personal details about my chart. So I have Saturn in Libra, which is actually considered a really good placement, even though Saturn is ultimately about challenges and life lessons. It it's a good placement to have in Libra because, Libra is all about how to relate to people better. Libra rules relationships. So it's a good challenge to have. It's, helps you focus more on connecting with people. And so I find as I get older, that becomes easier in some ways. I do find that, maybe my limitation, I think, was I was more of a people pleaser when I was younger. And now I think it's a little bit easier to, um, be assertive and also just kind of speak matter of factly to people. But I think ultimately, like relating to people isn't just about making sure everyone's happy, but it's ultimately too about just speaking your truth and being your authentic self as well. I think that, that's kind of one of the risk factors for Libra is that they can kind of give up their sense of identity to try to make other people feel better because they're all about harmony. And so I want to mention Saturn as being one of the more important placements in a birth chart, and there's other ones too we can talk more about. But I definitely think just the fact that we're seeing these types of challenges coming up in our personal lives, because I feel like everyone I talk to is going through some type of challenge lately. Maybe not you, because I feel like you seem to have your shit together, but I
It's
definitely
been
don't.
no everything. I mean, I will say The end of last year was rough, but yeah, I'm good. I'm good now. And I started stressing out about like when where I'm going to go when my bus is done, and I'm like I'm totally making this stress myself. So I'm like, let's just let this go. But my point is like, yeah, I could make made some challenges for myself, but I chose not to. But,
For our listeners who don't know about the bus, can you
oh,
explain what?
yes. I'm converting a 5 window short bus to an RV, and it should be done in a couple months. And I was just like, well, where am I going to go when my bus is done? Which sounds like that'd be fun, right? And it will be. I just feel like winter is a little trickier because there's less places you can go to. But anyway, this is not about me or the bus, but I did want to ask, so if someone gets their birth chart, they see their Saturn placement. And when you say placement, it's like this other uh, planet is in Saturn. Is
Or
that
it's the sign that Saturn's in, or the
okay?
sign that any planet is in. And they talk about planets. I mean, the moon is technically a planet in the birth chart, even though it's not really a planet. But so when they talk about planets, sometimes they're talking about, the sun and the moon, which I know are not really planets, but that's, yeah, when they say placements, they mean like what sign is something in, whether it's a planet or a house.
Okay.
You get to explain houses in a minute, but
Okay. So they see where Saturn is, and then is the chart going to give them information um, about about it, or is it just saying where it is and then they need to figure out where that what that means?
most most calculators will give you like a breakdown of like what that means. There's very few that will just give you the
Yeah,
placements and nothing else because most people wouldn't know what to do with that. That's kind of the
right.
problem reading birth charts and why you needed a professional astrologer prior to the internet is because, that it required specialized knowledge. Now they just have tools that generate a full breakdown of your birth chart from your sun sign to your ascendant, I mentioned houses a moment ago. I'll just explain real quick that you have 12 planets in your chart. You have, uh, well, I think 12, let me think. Yeah, something like that. You have your sun, moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, uh, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. So you have those planets, like I said, planets in quotes, and then you have 12 houses, which the houses correspond to the signs, but it's based on the time that you're born. So your ascendant, which is the placement that actually kind of more accurately describes your personality because it's how people see you. I think with astrology, like the zodiac sign is kind of like how you receive things. It's like your core self. It's like how you take things in, and your ascendant is how you project things out, more or less. So the ascendant is like your social mask. It's how people perceive you. And that's the first house. It goes by different names, the ascendant, the rising sign. And then that corresponds to Aries because Aries is all about individuality and identity. It's the first sign of the zodiac, so it's about the I, and it goes all through the different houses. The second sign corresponds to Taurus, which is the second sign in the zodiac. You can actually just look at like the order of the signs from Aries to Pisces, which is the last sign, and that corresponds to the 12 houses. So, first house has to do with individuality and identity and how you're perceived socially. And then the 12th house, which corresponds to Pisces, has to do with how you overcome your sense of self. It's spiritual transcendence, and those are the qualities that Pisces is associated with. So it's a bit to try to explain kind of briefly, and especially in this kind of format. But when you read through the chart, it'll explain what each of those mean. So the most important placements in terms of someone wanting to use astrology as a tool for healing would be their Saturn placement and their North Node. Their North Node tells them kind of what they're meant to accomplish in this life, to overcome challenges, because the South Node is like what comes most easily to you. And they're always the opposite. So, like, whatever sign your North Node is in, your south node is in the opposite sign because each sign has its opposite. I have my north node in Gemini, and my south node in Sagittarius because those signs are opposite. And so Sagittarius is a philosophical sign. It has to do with higher learning and faith. And so I feel like those qualities of like being able to understand things on a more kind of mystical level come naturally. Gemini is more rational and focused on like objective truth, and it tends to be a little bit more focused on like knowledge as a whole versus like the depth of knowledge. Sagittarius, I think, goes deep into topics because it's the archer, so it kind of pierces through the outer layers into the core truth of things, whereas Gemini is more scattered. It wants to know a little bit about a lot of things, and so for me, it's like becoming more objective and kind of cultivating an interest in a lot of different topics. So North Node is like kind of changing the way that you think and the way that you approach life in a way that's a little bit different from like a Saturn placement, where I see that more as like things that you start out with dealing with in your childhood that you need to overcome as you go through your life. So So yeah, the North Node and Saturn, those are the two to look for. So, and when I talk about using astrology as a tool for healing, this is like one of many uses for astrology. People use it. I know the reason that attracted me to astrology was just the way that it helped me better understand, why people are the way they are, and also better able to feel like the way that my personality is exactly as it should be, and we're all exactly as we should be because otherwise we wouldn't be this way. And astrology is this shows that that's reflected even in the cosmos. I think it's interesting how astrology shows that there is this like correlation between the outer world and the inner world, and that the outer world reflects back to us our inner experience in the cosmos. So I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of different tools for it, for using it.
Yeah. And do you think, because, before we incarnate, I think we pick our parents and, our life basically. And although there's maybe, different ways different paths we can take on our life, but do you think we pick our sign, our everything in our birth chart, right? Do you think we pick all of that before?
Yeah, I've heard a lot of channelers talk about this, how it's not that the placement of different planetary bodies determines your personality. It's actually the other way around. Like you come in
Right.
at a time that the cosmos reflect your personality. So it's because of who you are that you come in at that moment when the configuration of all of these different planetary bodies reflects at least the energies that you want to explore in this life, because we're ultimately bigger than our personality in the physical form. We might be highly evolved intellectually in this life, but maybe not as advanced emotionally or spiritually. But I think, you probably have received information about this when channeling that ultimately, like, we're bigger than our, you know, physical personality is in this life.
Yeah, of course. And just for example, I'm a Virgo, and we know Virgos are about being perfectionists and hard on ourselves. So I feel like, well, if that's something I need to work on, I'm going to be born at a time where that really increases those traits in me. It's not that I have them already, but they need to come up in this lifetime so I can help, or so I can heal them. Um,
Yeah, and I think one of the criticisms sometimes that people level against astrology is that it's tied up with the ego and it's all about identity. It's like I'm this sign, and
mm,
it's in some ways kind of valid. I mean, I do think that astrology is about your identity and mostly just about the qualities that are accentuated in your identity, because ultimately you have all the signs in your chart somewhere.
mhm.
And I think that as long as you're having a physical experience, then there is some degree of ego. And not that it's necessarily like something you want to over identify with. And I don't even necessarily think you have to identify with it, but you can at least recognize that your personality takes on a particular form and you can appreciate that form without necessarily identifying with the form. You can understand that like you're not the form that you see because anything you see is out, at least appears to be outside of yourself. It's the object of your perception and you're the subject doing the perceiving. So I kind of understand where people are coming from when they say like, astrology is just about the ego and identity and all that. And so it's kind of limited, but ultimately I think it's helpful because I think for a lot of people that compare themselves to other people and say, like, well, I don't feel like I'm as physically competent, I'm not someone that like good at sports or something like that. I don't know, just as an example. But maybe you're not meant to be in this life. Maybe you're meant to be someone that is more emotionally attuned to people and that you can serve in that way, or you might be someone with really incredible creative talent, and so that's something you're meant to cultivate. I think it just shows that this is kind of the map of your life, and you have a ton of room to do what you want, but that you just might find that this is kind of like where you hit the ground running, and to get to some other place, it just might take a lot of work, whereas it's other ways, the path that you were on when you were born might just feel easier if you kind of continue in that direction. But ultimately, we have choice in what we do in life, and you can go with the abilities that you're given and develop those, or you can pivot and do something entirely different. It just might feel more challenging. But astrology, I think, just shows like the qualities that you're starting out with in life, because it's ultimately about the qualities of moments in time and the qualities of the moment and time that you were born, or the qualities that you feel when you're in Virgo season, and the day you were born, there are all the other qualities of the different placements of your chart. And same with me too. I mean, I feel like each period in time, like throughout the year, has a different flavor to it. And you kind of see that reflected in people's personalities too. I just feel like there's something about time that seems to have an effect on people, even if the whole purpose of a lot of spiritual modalities is to kind of transcend at least psychological time, and focus more on the present moment. And that's kind of one of the things I'm curious to get your thoughts on. Like, I mean, not that this maybe even factors in a lot with what you're doing, but I mean, do you focus more on the present moment, or do you focus on things you're trying to accomplish? Because a lot of people who, try to learn how to consciously manifest, like the law of attraction, which I'm not sure what your feelings are on that, but they do focus a lot on like, here's what I want to have happen in the future. And other people focus on, I just need to be present. And it seems like those two things are kind of at odds with each other. And I'm curious how you approach life. Do you tend to focus more on just the here and now, or?
Yeah, definitely more on the here and now. I don't um, I don't actively manifest at all. Um, and I mean, the angels have told me before, they're like, what we have or what's in store for you is so much better than what you're even imagining. So basically, stop.
Yeah,
So I'm not, people need to do what works for them. I'm not a manifester, even though, of course, our thoughts, our feelings are also kind of are manifesting our lives anyway. But the manifesting you're talking about, I don't necessarily do. I'm definitely more here and now type of person. Even um, well, I don't know if we're going to leave this in, but when I was talking about the bus, or that the bus part in, I was like trying to figure out ahead of time. And I'm like, what am I doing? Just stop. Just be here now, right?
yeah. And I found that there was a way of reconciling these two things, like being present with manifesting, or even just focusing on something you might want to have happen. And the reason I mention this is because of the fact that there seems to be this like contradiction between spirituality that emphasizes presence versus spirituality that emphasizes manifestation, which is, manifesting things in the future, and also the lack of a tool that helps with understanding when the timing of things might happen because, I mean, I feel like channeling can do this. I mean, you've channeled for me and given me dates and things, and it's been really accurate. And a lot of channelers don't give dates. A lot of times they'll say, it's not important when it happens. It's just the what. And even on the law of attraction, that's kind of one of the things they really admonish people not to do is focus on the when or the how, but just the what. Like, and honestly, in my experience, I know we're talking about law of attraction, not astrology, but is that the less I think about it, the more successful I seem to be. If I just have kind of an intention and then sort of release it, then it seems to happen more easily and I would imagine more quickly than if I'm kind of laboring over trying to focus on it, trying not to think thoughts that are in opposition to it happening, negative thoughts. But with astrology, what I find is that it does talk about the timing of things and like we were talking about earlier about the timing of this kind of awakening that's happening and how that's reflected in the fact that we're going through this major shift right now that has a lot of people really shaken up because of just the fact that a lot of these kind of old systems and this old world that like we lived in, and I think people thought like just would never change, I mean, I think a lot of people are mourning the fact that like the world that they thought they were going to continue to live in is not going to exist for much longer. I think a lot is changing, and I think for the better, just from my own point of view and own intuition. But I do think that, just knowing the timing of things can be helpful. And I think in the case of this great period of change we're going in, and also just helping people frame things, better, like that this is a period of opportunity, like the timing of things, like when change happens, it's an opportunity for people to, choose something different from what they've been doing before. So, and also sometimes it's choosing not to do something, because I know we're in a Mercury retrograde right now, which might explain why I'll just mention that we had some technical issues getting this episode started. We had dogs barking and we actually almost aborted it. I'm glad we didn't. It seemed like maybe the universe didn't want us to have this conversation, but it worked out really well. But I think that there's times when maybe technology might fail or communication might break down during a Mercury retrograde, and that's not the time to try to have difficult conversations or complex ones like astrology, because I can't think of a topic where it's like I've been reading about it for well over a decade, and I feel like I've just barely scratched the surface of it. So yeah, I do find for me at least, and I'm not a Virgo, but I have two kind of pivotal Virgo placements. I have my Mercury and Venus in Virgo. So I think my thinking and kind of, like what I love in life tends to be knowing how things are going to go ahead of time, perfection and precision. So I find it really helpful. I don't know. I mean, maybe that's speaks more to like, my limitations in some ways. I have a harder time just going with the flow. Um, but that's just how I'm wired, I guess. But still, I mean, but what I was saying earlier about how there is a way of reconciling these two ways of looking at things, like a presence focused type of spirituality or one that's focused more on manifestation. Because I've heard people talk about this that manifestation is ultimately kind of rooted in your thinking, and you can just enjoy the thought of something. So you can be present with the enjoyment of thinking about something that you're trying to manifest. And I think you can bring about presence and manifestation simultaneously through that if you just enjoy the process. I think it's when it becomes a struggle, like you were talking about with the bus, like trying to overthink it. I think that's where it becomes a struggle. Hello there.
And so it's like, it's almost time for me to eat.
I know.
Um, yes. And right. If it's a struggle, that's a problem. And also, I wasn't even trying to, I mean, it was all just like planning, like, what am I going to do? It wasn't like if I was into manifesting, it's like I would just go in with the feeling I want. How do I want to feel when I'm on my bus, when I'm driving around? Right. I'm all like, that's that to me, that's more important than like, oh, I want to get to, you know, San Diego or something. Like, um, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's I don't know, it's interesting how these things kind of fit together in a way. I mean, because I actually remember talking to a friend of mine about this because he would always talk about how law of attraction doesn't really help you when it comes to the timing of things. And, that's kind of like the one frustrating part about it is like you're just supposed to focus on the what. And so I feel like astrology is a piece of the puzzle. Tarot can do this too. I think tarot can give insight into the timing of things. Channeling can do that as well. But I feel like if any one modality is specifically tailored to time, it's astrology. And so I think that's like one of the benefits of it, but definitely not the only one. Because in a sense, that's using it for predictive purposes. And what I find more useful actually is the way that people can gain insight into their own personalities, like we've been discussing. And so I mentioned those two placements, Saturn and the North Node. And I realize this is kind of a Cliff Notes version, like an astrology discussion. We're not really getting too deep into any particular topic, but yeah, I think if people haven't looked up their birth chart, it's really fascinating. I think, for some people, they might not necessarily resonate with it. What I find interesting is, there's more than one form of astrology. There's Vedic astrology, Western astrology. And they don't always correspond exactly. So what I found is some people resonate with Western classical astrology, and other people resonate more with their Vedic chart. And so depending on which system you use, actually, you could be a different sign. So because astrology hasn't adjusted for the precession of the equinoxes, at least Western astrology. So and this actually is tied in with what we're talking about with the Age of Aquarius. This is what follows the precession of the equinoxes is the fact that the Earth wobbles on its axis, so it shifts by tiny degrees every year, tiny fractions of a degree, so that over thousands of years, where the sun is on the spring equinox shifts from one sign to another. So where it is right now is like right on the cusp of Pisces and Aquarius. It actually goes backwards through the zodiac because Pisces comes after Aquarius. So it's moving backwards. Now we're moving into Aquarius. But it's because of that wobble, the Earth's axis, that the signs also slowly shift. So you might actually, depending on the date you were born, Melissa, you might actually be a Leo under different systems of astrology. And that's what I find sometimes is people say, well, this doesn't resonate. And it's not necessarily due to the fact that astrology isn't valid, but I think sometimes it's, a person might look at their chart under a different system of astrology and find that that one resonates more. So, and I ultimately think the way all this works is we're just making it all up. It's entirely our invention, and somehow it still makes sense, even though it should be BS when you think about it. I don't know why it seems to just work for people. I mean, when I talk to people, it's kind of, with a few exceptions, I feel like it's a system that shouldn't make sense, but it does.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like my birth chart definitely suits me, definitely fits. And I also, not that we're going to get into this, but I'll just mention it really quick. Um, I recently had a Mayan cross reading done. It's basically your birth chart based on the Mayan calendar. And that totally fit me too, which,
Really
yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
Well, that's what's funny is that I read about a lot of different types of astrological systems. I haven't read about the Mayan cross yet, so I will look into that. But when I read about my Chinese zodiac sign, it's interesting because I'm a pig and you're a snake, and we're opposite signs there. Like snakes are more strategic, and I think they're more just intelligent and cunning, and pigs are also intelligent, but they're kind of naive and overly trusting of people, but they just they're
Yeah, because
I
you're,
think
yeah, you're definitely intelligent. You're more intelligent than me. Yeah.
sometimes naive. I think I do trust people kind
Yeah.
of by default. And uh, but so, but it's interesting that I see sometimes when I've had relationships and things where I'm like, this shouldn't have necessarily worked from a classical astrological perspective. When I looked at the Chinese zodiac, it's like a perfect pairing. And so I think that's it's interesting just how, some of these offer like more insight into why you might uh, resonate with people that, because I'm a fire sign, you're an earth sign. They normally think of fire and earth as like kind of, like earth kind of smothers fire and fire can like burn up earth. And so it's not, they don't necessarily feed off each other. But, um, but I don't know. I find that there's always more to it. You and I both have Moon and Gemini. I think that's like why we like to talk. I think that's kind of been the basis of our friendship is we've just always enjoyed chatting with each other. And Gemini is the twins, so
Hmm.
they're the most communicative sign, I think, because kids like to talk.
Yeah. Yeah.
Gemini,
But
twin
I didn't
children.
know that. I mean,
Yeah,
I don't know a lot about astrology, but yeah, that's interesting.
yeah. So yeah, I thought it'd be interesting just to talk a little bit about these times we're living in and how astrology can help understand the shifts that are happening, but also, how to use it in your own personal life and, help use it as a tool for healing. Because I think that's something that is coming up for a lot of people is there's a lot of wounds and areas of their life that need attention. And I think that's going to become more noticeable as time goes on until those wounds and beliefs that, aren't serving people anymore are addressed. I know that's seems to be the theme.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And that's part of the reason why I'm here, obviously, to heal myself and help heal others. So now is definitely the time to do it. It's time of the ascension.
For sure. Well, it's been an interesting conversation, especially, and like I said, I didn't even think about the fact that this was a Mercury retrograde. Might not be the best time to do
Yeah.
a podcast, but it worked out. So I'm glad we did it. And yeah,
Yeah.
I think maybe by the time we do the next one, I think we'll still be in it. So we'll see if your
Yeah.
dogs.
It'll go better. It'll go.
Uh,
They're telling me it'll go better. It'll be smoother. They're saying there was more than just Mercury retrograde
oh,
today.
really? Okay.
Yeah. It's
Interesting.
all good.
Either way, well, always a pleasure and look forward to the next conversation. We don't have a topic lined up yet, but I'm sure it'll be something fascinating.
Oh, we don't. We do have a topic lined up.
We do. What are we
Yeah.
talking about next time?
Dream interpretation.
Okay, I've been sending you dreams, but it's like someone like I had a dream where my daughter's gerbil stuck its tongue out at me, but I had like a
Yeah, I wouldn't call
human
what you're
tongue.
sending me dreams.
And
You're
I had one
sending
where,
me two-line things.
well, that's the thing is like the dreams are so dull, and they're just I keep thinking this is just my brain processing
Yeah,
random stuff. One was about the gerbil escaping because we talked about that in the podcast, and so I'm
yeah,
kind of like, is this telling me something deeper? Or is it just this is what you were thinking about yesterday?
yeah. No, I think yours was just what you're thinking about. Um, 'Cause usually in the whole dream, there's going to be more, but since you sent just little snippets, it was like basically what was just going on in your life.
We'll see what happens in the next 2 weeks. Maybe I'll have some powerful dreams that, blow
Yeah,
my unconscious open.
and I'm going to send out an email too, I think, to have people send me dreams. I can
Awesome.
interpret them. So,
Cool. I look forward to that. Well, until next time, thank you all again for joining us. And yeah, see you in a couple weeks.
bye. Thanks.